The Port of Los Angeles, the largest shipping port in the U.S., is welcoming a 90-day pause and reduction of tariffs between the U.S. and China. The U.S. agreed to temporarily reduce its duties to 30% from 145%. China cutting from 125 to 10%, this after those trade talks over the weekend. However, Jim Sciutto, the executive director of the PortofLA, points this out, saying, quote, "Even with this announcement, tariff remains elevated compared to April 1st. To avoid further uncertainty and disruption of trade, both sides should work together swiftly towards a long-term agreement." Gene joins me now. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Good to see you, Jim.
So let's begin with what kind of traffic you're going to see there in the Port of LA, because there's all this talk about how it's fallen off a cliff, and that apparently still going to happen. But will this pause lead to a rebound right after that?
It may, Jim, but we'll look at 4 consecutive weeks of cargo volume coming into the Port of Los Angeles that are at the lowest point since we witnessed during COVID-19's pandemic. Wow. For the month of May, in and of itself, will be down by about 20% on ship calls and approximately 25% on cargo, both import and export.
Now, I imagine that those supply chains, right, there are a lot of pieces to them, right? The ships and then the trucks, et cetera, and then what eventually ends up on store shelves, that even if you did have things pick up next month or a couple months down the road, that kind of ripple in the supply chain would reverberate throughout. Do you expect to see that?
Not necessarily. If we look at the supply chain continuum and the node at the port, where we've had choke points in the past, we're running at less than a third of the cargo on the docks at the port that we did at the peak of the peak during COVID. We also have a computer system, the Port Optimizer, that gives us a 40-day upstream look at what cargo is loaded and a real good view 14 days out. So we won't get caught off guard. This could be important because shipping lines are looking at reinstituting services, putting forward schedules out to the marketplace. So we're only in day 2 of this most recent announcement on the pause. The days and weeks to come will tell us what cargo will be restarted and how much will come our way.
You hear consistently from companies, whether they're small businesses or big multinationals, that they want certainty. They need to know, what tariffs are going to be, not just 90 days out, but beyond that. And are they going to change? Is the president going to have a bad day, right, and ratchet them up again? When you speak to folks who use your port, do they have any more certainty now, or are they just getting a bit of a reprieve?
I think there's a little bit of a reprieve, and you're exactly right, Jim. 90 days is not a long runway in our industry. That typically represents how long it takes to process an order that's been put in by an American importer and get it ready for shipment from Asia. So looking at the next 90 days, we may see folks with some pent-up demand that bring cargo in. Maybe there's some really important products. Think of medical supplies that have to go to our hospitals and doctors' offices. But people are doing the math right now to see if at a 30% tariff, which is really just an average of averages, depending on their commodity, it could be much higher and much more complicated. So we'll see exactly what the import community looks at. On the export side, the 10% for the American farmer and manufacturer is on top of other layers of tariffs. They too are doing some financial calculation to see how they can get back into the international market.
It's a good point, because yes, the tariffs are down, but they're certainly not down to zero, and historically they're still way up from where we were just a few months ago. Jim Sciutto, Port of LA, we appreciate you joining.